actually all imperfect.
Okay. Here's a question from Lewis. I have a question about effort. Sometimes you mention that effort cannot take us closer to the effortless place of what we already are. This I understand, that no practice can take us closer to what we already are, and that it is more about a non-doing instead of a doing. But what about the effort, for example, that is needed in the process of stabilizing and not giving into the worldly temptations and the mind's desires? Or about the courage to facing our deepest fears? Can you talk about the difference of these two?
What was the first one?
Okay. One is the notion that we can't use effort to get to the effortless state, and the other is...
No. You went too far back.
Okay. But what about the effort, for example, that is needed in the process of stabilizing and not giving into the worldly temptations and the mind's desires?
So, the worldly temptations, that sounds like the Pope. In other words, if you are not interested, if you don't really want to do it, don't do it. That's simple. If you want to do it, there is no effort. If you don't want to do it, and you do it because you hope that by doing it, you will get something in return, in this case, you are trying to cut a deal with God. We are trying to negotiate. I give you this and you give me that. I give you a little bit and you give me everything. Yeah. So God doesn't negotiate in this way. God gives you everything for free. If you try to pay for grace, it's not going to work. Even if you try to pay with effort. Because there is a fundamental misunderstanding at the bottom of this, at the origin of this process. So the first thing is to understand. So basically, if you don't really want to do it, don't do it. If you really want to do it, do it. I mean, it's simple, right? So I repeat it. If you don't really want to do it, don't do it. If you really want to do it, do it. So what you really want to do may require courage, may require apparent effort of the body, may require fighting your demons or whatever. But you need to really want to do it, to be interested in the process of doing it. You see? So that's the difference. The example I use is my playing tennis when it's hot. It's an effort for the body. The body doesn't want to do it. I want to do it. You see, that's different. So for me, there is no effort. For the body, there is effort. So you have to understand the distinction between the effortlessness of consciousness and the efforting of the body or of the mind. In other words, the body doesn't want to play tennis. It is dragged, kicking and screaming to the tennis court in the morning. You see, it doesn't want. Yeah, I don't want. Master, I don't want to go to this place down there in Murrieta. But I am the master, so no, the master wants to do it, so you better follow. Anyways, you don't have any choice. If the master wants to do it, the body has to follow. So it's the same with the mind. We know that. So the question comes from confusion. between the levels of authority. So the final choice belongs to us, meaning to awareness. That's the master. Awareness is the master, the choosing master. And then the servants, they may or may not agree with the order, but they have no choice but to execute.
Another question from Barbara. What is the role of energy on the path? My understanding is that it clears the body-mind from residue of separate self. Is this understanding correct? Once you find yourself on energy path, is it still important to conduct experiments? It feels like the separate self has nothing to do anymore, as it's being quote-unquote done. Thank you.
Well, this question, as I understand it, requires some explaining. Because the word energy is one of those words on which in spiritual and New Age circles, everybody pretends that they are talking about the same thing, whereas in fact, they are talking apples and oranges among themselves, right? So then there is great confusion. So for me, the word energy, it means force times distance. And but because of the way the question was asked, I understand it as coming from the understanding of the tantric path. In the tantric path of the Kashmirian Shaivism, they have what is called the triple path, trika. And there is a path of the individual, and then there is another path which is translated into French, into English, as the path of energy. And the final path is the path of Shiva. So, we are on the path of the individual as long as we believe to be a separate entity. We are on the so-called path of the energy when we are no longer believing to be a separate entity. But in the presence, however, of residues of ignorance manifesting as bodily sensations. So, and also as thoughts. And in the moments when there are no such manifestations, we are on the path of Shiva, which is also known as Sahaja Samadhi, meaning our natural state. So, the question is, what's the difference between those paths? I have explained it. So, regarding more specifically the path of the energy, and if the question is there something to do on this path? The answer is yes, it's a free country. You can do anything which doesn't originate from the belief or from the feeling to be a separate entity. Because the moment you do anything from the belief to be a separate entity, or from the feeling to be a separate entity, you have fallen into the path of the individual. But the moment whatever you undertake is not undertaken based upon the assumption to be a separate and limited consciousness, and the endeavor being to liberate this body-mind from old habits that it has acquired under the dictatorship of ignorance, that this endeavor in and by itself doesn't come from ignorance. It is an impersonal endeavor. So because it doesn't come from ignorance, whatever you undertaken, as long as you don't fall into the trap to believe to be a separate, limited, body-dependent awareness, then you are on the path of the energy. So then you can say, on the path of the energy, there might be things that you can do. You may do yogic exercise. You may read books. You may attend meetings like this one. All of that is kind of part of the path of the energy.
From Susan. Thank you for including the online audience. Is there a private, impersonal attribute of consciousness? And between truth lovers, there seems to be a sharing that is private and impersonal. What do you think? Is there a private aspect?
I don't understand what... If you mean that consciousness is private, yes, it is privatissimo. It is very private. Nothing is more private, nothing is more intimate, if you will, than consciousness. But at the same time, it's the least private things because we all have it in common. So I would say it's intimate, but not really private, or depending on how we use this word, private, intimate. But I don't really get the question.
I can only read it again. Is there a private, impersonal attribute of consciousness? And between truth lovers, there seems to be a sharing that is private and impersonal.
Yes. Truth lovers are open to the consciousness channel, if you will. And through this consciousness channel, they establish a loving connection among each other. So that's... And this channel is, of course, very intimate. I wouldn't say private. So the relations among truth lovers have very different qualities than usual relationships among human beings who are in ignorance. It doesn't mean that human beings who are in ignorance never have the experience of love. No. But it comes to them unexpectedly and not in a continuous fashion usually, because they experience it during these blessed moments, if you will, when the belief to be a separate entity is temporarily anesthetized, either by some external events or for some apparent other reason.
From Omkar, what is the role of grace in liberation? Why cannot I, as awareness, demand grace instead of having to depend on it?
Ultimately, the one who gives the grace and the one who receives it are the same. The understanding and the experiencing of the oneness between the giver and the receiver is, in fact, the experience of grace. If we demand grace based from the vantage point of ignorance, believing to be a separate person, to whom grace will be given, this belief only postpones the experience of the liberating experience of grace. So there are two comments that I could add. One is Ramana Maharshi, who once said to his followers, grace, grace, you're asking for grace, not seeing, not understanding that you are immersed in it up to your neck. And the other thing that I could mention is since Omkar is asking this question, in the Tripura Rasya, which is an Indian text on liberation, there is a story of the one who travels actually on the path of the individual, asking for grace, lifetime after lifetimes, rebirth after rebirth. After zillions of lifetimes, the goddess at some point has mercy of this poor devotee and send him a teacher on the direct path, or her. So that's the idea that as long as you ask for grace, believing to be a separate entity, it doesn't help. It doesn't help. At some point, I guess God is getting tired of, it's like you want to get rid of a beggar, So the grace that you give yourself is the moment you begin to investigate who is asking for grace. Why am I doing that? Who do I believe to be as I do this? So that's a moment of grace, when you shift from asking to investigating who is asking.
So my experience is of being expanded, but of having an axis, my body being the axis of the expansion. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
it is still a bodily sensation. Subtle. Albeit kind of a final one, one that immediately leads to our universal presence. The words you use by Jean Klein use often the expression our axial nature. But it's an image because we are a center, but as Pascal used to say, the center, the circle, the center of which is everywhere and the periphery nowhere. You know, but yes, there is this notion that we are a center experientially, and what happens is that we attribute falsely this centeredness to various bodily sensations in the head, in the chest, in the esophagus, and every time discrimination tells us, no, I am not that, because that is perceived. So all these candidates to be our center are kind of dismissed one by one. You know, it's neti, not this, not this, not this. But this notion of a center remains even when all the candidates have been dismissed and no candidate is left. And then all that remains is the notion that there is some kind of center or axis, you know. But if you look carefully, you'll see that everything that appears to be such a center or such an axis is still a perception. But you have to investigate that.
I have another question. It's about making decisions and about last week I asked a question online about the process of becoming, and if becoming is always comes from a sense of separation. And so I guess the question is really, how do I know? Because a lot of urges that I feel have both impersonal and personal parts to them. And so how do you discern?
Ultimately, the way to go about it is to understand I have no needs. I, as consciousness, have no needs. I'm free. The body, the mind, may have needs. You know, they are the servants. I'm the master. So then, you can take the body and the mind as children. Sometimes your child wants to do something, and you know that it is not too good for the child, right? And then you tell the child, no, I don't want you to do this. So it's your intelligence and your sense of love, your impersonal position, that will dictate somehow, not dictate, but through understanding, that will tell you what whether you go along with the desire of the children, you have two children, your mind and your body, right? So whether to go along with the desires of your children, if they are justified, if they are in their interest or not. And more than that, of course, we have our mind, our body, and the rest of the world. So in fact, we have three children. So in our decision making, we have to see whatever is in the interest of our three children, right? And although there is one child on which this child is an adult, that's the world, doesn't obey us, whereas the body and the mind are still under our supervision. But in our decision-making process, we have to take the three into account, meaning other people, etc., other people involved in the decision.
And so there's no real goal, right? Like there's no like actualization of becoming like, do you know what I mean?
No, because you are not becoming. The body and the mind are in becoming. You are not in becoming. You have always been the same. But as the manager of the body and the mind, you can, in the steward of the world, you can do your best to make sure that this becoming is harmonious.
This is probably the same question again, but we have the power to authorize different thoughts, right, as they come up and give them validity, right?
The thoughts, they come to us, right? But we can refer them to our intelligence. And as a result, validate or disqualify these thoughts. And the benchmark in this case is, do they come from ignorance or not? So yes, as you said, it's tricky because the body and the mind may have their own desires or needs, and often, even on that level, they can be at odds with each other, you see. And then you have the world, meaning other people, the rest of the world, and so on. Also, in this decision-making process, there is an important element, is that unless time is of the essence, if we are in an emergency situation, if there is a lack of clarity, we can always postpone any decision. You know, that's wisdom. There is no hurry to decide if there is no emergency and if we don't have full clarity on a decision to make. So we have to be patient and wait to see clarity. Yes, that's what I want to do, that's what I have to do, that's the right thing to do. And nobody can tell us what to do, you know. We are the only one. We need, so it's important to remove ourselves from any external pressure or interference to metaphorically, go in some cave to isolate ourselves from all parties involved in the decision-making process, so that we can really meditate. Of course, some decisions are not important. I'm talking about decisions that are important in our lives, that are consequential.
Thank you.
Hi, Francis.
Hi.
I think this is a question about my confusion. I think I'm good at doing that, creating confusion. So we'll try my best to get the clarity on question. So at some point I used to follow Ramana Maharshi's What Am I or Who Am I practice. And I read few books, so I felt that he's trying to get to the point that you realize that you as a person you don't exist, or the doer of action, there is no doer of action or thinker of thought. And somehow I felt I got that realization or experience at some point that there is no I that exists, or at least now in retrospect I feel that was my experience. I'm confused, was it or was it not? But I felt really good that time, light, and my whole body was pulsating with kind of tingling sensation and stuff like that. But it continued and didn't go anywhere, so some different thoughts came in at some point, I don't know when. And then I came across this practice of I am. Just practicing that you exist, we have that feeling that I exist, so trying to hold on to that feeling that I am. Then I got confused between this practice and this practice, that one practice is I am not, another practice is I am. And my personal experience was, yes, something is there, and whenever I try to practice that there is nothing, then I logically question, but who is thinking that there is nothing, or who is experiencing that something is there? That's my inherent feeling. But when I do I am, I feel like maybe I am strengthening my personal self, or so I'm in this traumatic situation of, and I want to do one of these
To
two.
be or not to be.
Yeah, so, and I don't know, I'm attracted to one of these two, but if I go for one, the other conflicts with the first one. So please help.
It's important to if we do a practice, it's important to be clear as to what the goal is and why do I do that, right? And the goal, I think, is happiness. That's a clear goal, right? To be happy or to find inner peace. That's a clear goal we can agree on. Now, the next question is, how does this practice take me closer to the goal? Because it's not sufficient to have been told by someone, do this and it will take you to the goal. I mean, that's not satisfactory, right? Because if someone tells you, say Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, that's one practice, right? Coca-Cola, 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 and that will make you happy, right? And then, so you do Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, after a while, you're not happy. So you go to this other guru who says, no, that's not good. The mantra is Pepsi-Cola, Pepsi-Cola. And you try Pepsi-Cola, and it doesn't make you happy either. So it's important to see the connection, to understand the connection there is between whatever practice and the goal. The goal is clear. But what is not clear is the connection between the practice and the goal. That's what the problem with Ramana Maharshi is that he's passed away a long time ago. And you cannot ask him question, what do you mean by self-enquiry? Of course, we have things he has said that have been transcribed by his disciples, But it's not a sure thing. It's not a sure thing, because at the ashram in Tiru, they were publishing this journal called The Mountain Path. And there was an anniversary in the 70s, in the late 70s, in which they had asked several disciples of Ramana Maharshi to talk about their experience, and their understanding. And I happened to read this journal, and I was not convinced, because only one of those writers was clear about his understanding. Only one of the rest was very much bhakti, Ramana Maharshi was a great guy, basically, right? And I felt silence, I felt nice when I was with him. Good for you, I would say. But how does that relate to me, who have not met him, right? You understand what I mean, right? So here is a connection. What did he mean when he said, investigate, inquire, Atma Vichar, So, did he mean to say, what am I, 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 like Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, what am I, what am I, what am I? I don't think that this what am I is going to do much better for you than Pepsi-Cola. Right? So, obviously, he meant something else. Because he was using the word investigation. He was not using the word repetition. Right? It's very different. So the example I use is a detective trying to find out who did it. So there are two detectives. So the one who is in the japa persuasion, he arrives at the office, 8 o'clock in the morning, and starts his mantra, who did it, who did it, who did it, all day long, right? 5 o'clock, time to go home. And there are the other detectives next to him, who is on the investigation, persuasion. He reads the autopsy report, he goes around and questions potential witnesses in the neighborhood, etc. Right? So who do you guess has the best likelihood to find who did it? Of course, the one who investigates, right? So what Ramana Maharshi meant is that in your own case, conduct this investigation. Don't do something repetitive. follow any lead that you have. You know, try, investigate, ask people, read books, try to come to places like here. You see, try to be active, proactive in your investigation. So, I can even facilitate your task by kind of limiting the scope of your investigation, which makes it easier. In other words, the question, what am I, the answer to this investigation can be simplified in 2 steps. The first step is to reach the understanding that I am that which perceives rather than anything perceived. Right? And that which perceives, I call it consciousness. Right? Chaitanya. It is a very important step. I cannot pretend I have taken this step and still believe I am the body or I am the mind, because both the mind and the body are perceived. So we cannot go lightly. We have to really deeply investigate, am I the body, am I the mind? The body and the mind are both perceived. I know for certain that I perceive. I know I perceive my body, I perceive my mind, I perceive the world. So, if, let's assume they are different, for the sake of the argument. Let's assume there is a difference between that which perceives and that which is perceived. In that case, which one am I rather? Right? And to reach a conclusion, well, I am awareness. You know, that's the first step. To be very clear, I am awareness rather than whatever it is that awareness perceives. Because awareness is real. I cannot... Because if awareness was not real, whatever is perceived, how can I know it's real? If awareness is not real, right? How can I know that? How could an illusion perceive something real? So awareness is real, and awareness is my real self. That's the first conclusion. And then the second step to take is, how do I know that this awareness that I know to be now, because now I've already limited the scope of my investigation because I have excluded the body and the mind as being me. So it becomes simpler. I don't have to investigate the body or the mind. I only have to investigate awareness because I have made the determination that I am awareness. So the question, what am I? Now I have a first partial answer. I know I am awareness. So I have already taken this step. But that's not sufficient. The second and final step is to try to answer the question, is this awareness limited in any fashion or form based upon my experience? Limited meaning, for instance, is it dependent upon the body or the mind based upon my experience? Or is it limited in time? In other words, was it born? Will it die? Based upon my experience of it. Because nobody else has the experience of my awareness but me, right? Right? I am the only one who can answer this question. Can I? You know? So, but if I say I can't, if I am certain I can't, I have already taken a huge step. I have taken the second step. You know, that's the beauty of it. That people believe on the path, that the second step has to be a positive step, a positive understanding. In other words, I have to know that I am not limited. No, it's not necessary. All I have to know in the second, why is it that I don't have to know something positive? It's because the first step was positive. The first step already told me what I am. The first step told me I am awareness. That's it. That's what I am. So the first step was positive. I don't need anything more. But the second step liberates me from the belief that awareness is limited. Because I'm the only one who can answer this question, and I can't. So the second step is negative in that sense that I cannot answer the question. I am absolutely certain that neither I nor anybody else can answer the question. But everybody else, almost everybody else around me in the world, pretend they can answer the question. They pretend they have an answer. They pretend they have the answer that awareness is limited and dependent upon the body. Are they smarter than me? Do they have access to more knowledge or facts than me about awareness? Hell no, right? If they pretend, I mean, they are con artists, right? So if I cannot find out, they cannot either. So that liberates myself. So on one hand, first step, I know what I am. On the second step, I know that I cannot decide that I am limited. That's the liberation from the belief that I was limited, right there. And the third step is now to live my life from this new perspective. That's important. But at this point, if you will, the investigation, the research, moves from the lab to the world. You know, it's like in the lab, you create a laser, you know, it's big, it's huge, you know, and then you have these little lasers that everybody, you buy them for a few bucks, right? But the first laser was big, right? So in the lab, and then back to the world, to life, we apply this openness, this understanding, to live my life as if awareness was not limited. You know, that's... And then we receive the response from the universe. And this response is always the same and always different. Always the same because of its origin and of its destination. Always different because of the journey between the origin and the destination.
Sorry, can I ask a follow-up question? On the step 1 itself, I have a question, like the realization that I am awareness, I am not body or mind. How does that happen? Like, for example, me, I don't know awareness, right? I don't know how it looks like, not look, but what is the feeling of awareness? I don't know. I perceive things, I taste, I smell, and I know those things, but I don't know awareness at all. Like, I can make up logically something because you are saying or books are saying, But how does that first step, do you clearly pursue something and you know that is awareness, or how does somebody come to know that you are awareness? Or
If I ask you the question, is there awareness in this moment?
I don't know. I perceive things that I know. That's all I can say. Like,
Okay.
is it awareness perceiving, or is
let
I don't know.
me ask you then a slightly different question.
Mhm.
Is there perceiving in this moment?
Yes.
Okay. And so perceiving is awareness.
But then how do I know I am that? Like, I perceive from so many different organs, right? I mean, from ear I perceive
Oh,
sound, and
you choose what you are. You can choose to be the reality that perceives, or you can choose to be something which is perceived. It's your decision. I'm not imposing it on you. But you were asking a different question. Your question was, is there awareness? That was your question. How do I know there is awareness?
yeah.
I ask you the question, is there perceiving? You said yes.
Mhm.
Perceiving is an experience, right?
Right.
Perceiving is the experience of awareness. That's all. Perceiving is the experience of awareness. Now, that which is perceived changes.
Mhm.
But would you agree that perceiving is continuous?
Yeah.
You see?
Mhm.
So, awareness, aka
Perceiving.
perceiving, is the continuous aspect of our human experience. Another quality of awareness.
Mhm.
In your dream, there is perceiving,
Mhm.
therefore, aka awareness, right? Now, would you agree that that perceiving is real?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that which is perceived is not.
Yeah, it depends on definition of real. I perceive this wall. It's real for me, right? I mean, I come tomorrow, it's still there.
In the dream,
Okay, yeah.
you touch the wall, it's real for you in the dream. You
Yeah.
wake up from the dream, where is the wall?
Right.
But awareness is the same. The point I'm making is that perceiving is the same during the dream and during the waking state, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't switch awarenesses,
Right.
but you switch states,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, which shows that because you switch states, you have no evidence that awareness is dependent upon any of the states.
Mm-hmm.
Because awareness is continuous.
Yeah.
So, awareness is at least as real as the states it perceives.
Mm-hmm.
Because if awareness was an illusion, how could he really perceive anything real?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
How can something which is an illusion really perceive? For instance, let me drive this nail in the coffin on ignorance. Let's assume in your dream you meet someone. You have a conversation with this person. Let's call it John. And in the dream, you are absolutely convinced that John perceives your words. Because you are having this conversation with John. Right? You are convinced that John perceives. you wake up. It turns out that John was an illusion. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Question. Do you still believe that John, who is now obviously an illusion, really perceived your words?
No.
Because an illusion cannot really perceive, right?
Right, right.
So, if awareness was an illusion, he could not perceive reality.
I get that, but I'm not debating or questioning that awareness is illusion or not real. I'm just not clear at step one that one gets a clear understanding that this awareness is kind of like, do we have to compromise at that step one that just see that this nebulous feeling of perceiving different sensation, just
But
like convince ourselves that is me and that is
everything which
awareness,
is perceived and which is nebulous is either bodily sensation, perceived
right.
in and by awareness, or an external or a thought, because we can have nebulous thoughts,
Yeah,
perceived by awareness.
right.
Awareness is always crystal clear, even when that which is reflected in it is nebulous. You can have a mist or fog or a cloud reflected in a mirror. Right? So the nebulosity of the reflection doesn't imply the nebulosity of the mirror.
Yeah.
You see? So, in fact, awareness is always crystal clear. And another name for awareness is understanding, intelligence. So, to answer your question, because your question was, I don't experience awareness. Ask yourself, which kind of experience, from which kind of experience do I derive all the answers I've just given to Francis' questions? Because you have answered many of my questions. You see? It's just that it is not the kind of experience we are used to. The kind of experience we are used to is through the senses, through the body, through thoughts, and they elapse in time.
Right.
Whereas there is another mode of knowledge which is more beyond time, instantaneous. We have to be open to this possibility. You know, it's a mode of knowledge through which we know awareness, through which awareness knows itself. Without objects, without vikalpas, without manifestation. It's a state, it's a samadhi without vikalpas. And if there are no perceptions, no objective perceptions, there is no time that elapses. You see, because we know time only because we have perceptions.
Right.
We know time as whatever is. In other words, our experience of time is that which we experience between perceptions. But it is also the experience of awareness. So ultimately, the nature of time is awareness.
Thank you, Francis.
The same question. Hi, Francis. So my confusion, I guess, is going from the indisputable logic of everything you just said, makes perfect sense, and then I can still ask, maybe later, the next day, whatever, I can still ask, what am I? And the answer sort of comes back, this mind-body. And then I can go through that same mental exercise that you just articulated, no problem. I mean, it does, it makes perfect sense. But how do you go from it being a mental exercise and a mental understanding to really, and the knowing, or the understanding you just said, and then also live it and live as if it's limitless?
Well, your question shows somehow that you still have a mental obstacle. And the mental obstacle is that you see understanding as mental instead of experiential.
Well, my experience is what you described a little earlier when you said, well, when you're in ignorance, these moments of grace and etc. just come to you more randomly. That's my experience, is I definitely have those moments of grace, and that what feels like a deep just feels like love, a deep feeling.
No, but that's not what I was referring to. I was referring to, you use, for instance, I agree with you with the logic, right? But logic is simply a way to process data, right? Boolean logic, it makes up just kind of equations. It can be programmed in a computer. A computer can be very logical. But if reason is something else than logic, there is an added element to it. Reason uses logic in its process, reasoning process, but it has to start from facts, right? And facts are experiential. Now, it is true that we use logic, that I use logic, but I use words to point at an experience, the experience of consciousness. And the logic is not important. It is the experience of consciousness which is important. In other words, in our previous conversation, there was not much logic, in fact, used. I didn't say very much, or because A, then C. Yes, I did it a little bit when I said that which is real cannot perceive, that which is an illusion cannot perceive that which is real. Therefore, so the logic was in the therefore. But when I say something like the illusion cannot perceive the real, that's not logical. Either you agree or not, but if you agree, understand that it is experiential. It is not logical. Where is the logic? The logic is all human beings are mortal. Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's logic. But it's based upon two prior statements. All human beings are mortal. Socrates is a human being. So it's a form of logical syllogism, right? But in this case, I didn't say anything. I made a statement, which is that which is an illusion cannot perceive reality. Either you agree or you don't. There is no logical process that leads you there. Or if I say something such as, in this moment there is awareness. That's not logical.
Right. I was referring to when you said, like, you already know that you're not the mind because you are perceiving the mind, or that you are not the body because you're perceiving the body, or the world. So it stands to reason, are you the perceived object, or are you the perceiver? And that
You know,
makes a
I
lot
don't,
of sense.
strangely enough, because you put in my mouth words
Oh,
that
sorry.
I don't
Didn't mean
say.
to. Sorry.
Or if I say them rarely. For instance, if I say, you're not the mind because you perceive the mind, I said, you have to choose whatever you are, which is not the same. Are you that which is perceived, or are you that which perceived? I'm not making the choice for you. That's the point. Your decision. Am I awareness that perceives, or am I that which is perceived? So again,
I see what you're saying.
I point to an experience. Then you experience it or you don't, you agree or you don't. The moment you agree with me, you're cooked. Because, but then what happens then, you have agreed, you're cooked. But then you say, oh, it was intellectual. It was mental. I want something more meaty. I want something, that is like a pound of meat and schmaltzy and, that holds in my stomach forever. You see? You see?
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Hi, Francis. I have a question about betrayal. When it feels like when someone you love betrays you, there's a flash of emotion and anger, and you want to tell the person that they betrayed you. And I don't know, something I've been thinking about is how, like if freedom is really free, then everything has to be totally free. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that people have to be free. And that maybe it's not even right to voice your anger or something. And I guess part of my question is, like, at what point, like, if I'm voicing my anger, am I already in ignorance? And yeah, but I guess betrayal feels like a tricky one, because there's separation in there somewhere, but there really can be a betrayal.
Usually, there are two ingredients, if you will, to a betrayal. Or three ingredients. One, it happens unexpectedly. Number one. Number two, it's unpleasant. And number 3, it's attributed to a person. Right? There are these 3 ingredients. Because if it is pleasant, unexpected, and attributed to a person, it's not a betrayal. Right? Your beloved comes with a nice gift for you. It's unexpected, it's pleasant, it's attributed to a person, but it's not a betrayal, right? If it is not attributed to a person and it is unpleasant, right? You fall while playing tennis, right? It hurts, right? But it's your own problem, or God's, right? It's not a betrayal, right? So it's unexpected, right? Unpleasant, but not attributable to a person. And when I say attributable to a person, in a kind of reckless way, with no consideration for you. Because it may be that something happens that you attribute to a person and which you experience as a betrayal, but then talking with this person, you realize that no, there was no malevolent intention or no reckless behavior, that it is just that which this person had to do. Right? When you understand his or her vantage point, you understand facing the same situation, I would have made the same choice. At that moment, your feeling of having been betrayed leaves you, right? Because you understand what has happened.
Well, I guess, like I definitely follow you there.
Okay, that's interesting.
Well, but I think that, like, I can see that this situation, this person's actions were a compilation of everything that ever happened to them, right? And everything that ever happened to anyone, in a way. It's a part of the chain of causality, right? And that, yeah, if I was in this person's situation, I would have done the same thing, because that was their conditioning, and yeah, there's no person there, right?
Right. No. Now, what happens?
They're innocent.
What happens when you understand that there is no person there? What's the difference between this and falling while playing tennis?
Yeah, it's like, ouch, but
yeah, it hurts in a different way. I mean, you can fall playing tennis and spend a month in the ICU, right? That's a possibility. So there is fall and fall. But basically, it's something, in this case, that the universe does to you.
Right.
So then you feel that God is betraying you. Right?
Yeah.
My mom was like that. She was a vehement atheist. She had been raised religious, but she was an absolute atheist. And then she was complaining. And then I told her, but who are you complaining to, since there is no God? So for people who are naturally born complainers, God is a good punching ball, It's good. Without a God, you have problems. So anyway, so then you move. It's only betrayal is only because you believe to be a person, that you see a person there who has betrayed you. Then when you understand that there is nobody there, is not different from an act of God. That's what it is. It's an act of God like anything else. You catch a flu, or you catch COVID, or whatever. You have an accident. I'm not saying it's pleasant, but it becomes impersonal. You deal with it. It's very different. You deal with it. You have to go to the hospital, you go to the hospital. You deal with it, you see. The personal, what is important is to absolutely remove the personal element from it. It's difficult, but it makes you grow in wisdom. From your answer, you understood that whatever happens was a result of the conditioning of this person, was all of that. Yeah, fine. The mistake perhaps you have made in getting involved with this person. Sometimes you get involved with someone and you have this small voice that tells you, you understand what I mean. And then you say, no, let's do it. It doesn't. Then there is a price to pay. So it's life, It's like you borrow money from your bankers, you have to give it back.
Or it's a pandemic. Whoops, is this thing on? Hello? Okay. Or it's a pandemic and you don't have many options.
So basically, what you have to trust is awareness. You trust awareness in you, you trust awareness in others. You don't trust others.
So, yeah, I can follow. I follow all that. It all makes sense, and it feels true in my experience. The second part is like when that happens, like that pain, which is impersonal. There's this feeling to, I guess, like the part of it is like then there's the anger part, and I'm navigating how anger and freedom interact because...
Well, in freedom, anger becomes outrage. And outrage is the impersonal form of anger. It is, outrage says, no, that didn't come from love. That didn't come from intelligence. That came from something else, from being a person, from personal interest, and who cares about anything else, who cares about the world, who cares about others, who cares. And yes, when we detect that, we have this thing in us that tells us, in fact, get the hell out of here. That's all. It tells us it's an unpleasant experience, and the unpleasantness has a very good rationale to it. It's like a poisonous food usually tastes bitter. If it tastes bitter, don't eat it.
So is there, like, is that outrage could be expressed?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes it's good to express to say, that didn't come from love. But sometimes you just take the lesson and it's not even, you don't even dignify it with an expression of outrage, only if you have the feeling that it can help, that it can somehow help this person who has betrayed you to realize what they have done. But you just move on,
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot. It's just, yeah.
I have news for you. The world is not the perfect place.
Noted.
But at the same time, it is the perfect place. You have to see the perfection in the apparent imperfection. It's
Yeah.
a school. It's a school.
I have another quick question. That answer covers everything, I think. I don't know if you've ever recently read a very interesting French philosopher named Rene Girard, and he talks a lot about imitation as the driving factor in human
About what?
imitation, like imitating someone, and I guess somehow I'm curious, like, what is the nature of, is imitation a factor for awareness? Because imitation can be about learning, but there can also be a negative form of imitation, and Rene Girard argues that Jesus called us to imitate God, and to avoid the negative form of imitation, which leads to violence and the scapegoat, complex stuff. But yeah, I guess my question is just, is imitation a factor here in any domain?
Well, imitation in this sense, if you talk about Jesus, there is this, this religious path, imitation of Jesus, right? It's a religious path. It's to imitate Jesus not only in his words, but also in his acts. The problem with Jesus is that he died a long time ago, and that physicists are not all in agreement regarding his resuscitation. And therefore, it's not easy to imitate someone who you don't see and with whom you don't talk, etc. There is a Hasidic story in which this truth seeker asks to see the master, and there is the master assistant, and he asks him, why do you want to see the master? And do you want to have do you have questions? Do you want to have a conversation with him? And this truth lover says no. And then the assistant says, oh, I see, you want to sit in his company just to share the perfume of his silence. And this truth seeker says no. And then the assistant says, then you've lost me. What do you want? And he says, I want to see how he ties his shoes. In other words, the imitation, we spontaneously imitate that which we love. And I'll tell you another story. I was staying with my teacher during the summer in Switzerland, and one day the phone rings, and my teacher is in his bedroom. I pick up the phone and I say, hello? And the voice on the other was a student of my teacher, and she immediately says, oh, Jean, I wanted to tell you this. And I said, I'm not Jean, it's Francis, it's not Jean. And then I realized that because I was living with him, that my voice had taken the exact intonation of Jean through this imitation process. You understand? I was not aware that I was imitating. I was unknowingly observing how he was tying his shoes and tying my shoes in the same fashion. That's what happens, So this form of imitation is part of the teaching, and it enables you to take shortcuts. Because, of course, if you get the bulk of the teaching, the skeleton, there is no awareness is universal, etc. You have the skeleton. You can, by yourself, in any given, potentially, you have this potential that in any given situation, you can find what to do by using your intelligence and your understanding. However, it may require it may be a painful process. It may require time and trial and error. So sometimes it's interesting to have someone who has, to have the benefits of the experience of someone who has been there, done that, and you say, okay, he ties his shoes this way, I don't understand why, right? But I am going to tie them, to do the double knots the way he does, And then you realize that you are walking with someone who has not or playing tennis with someone who has not the double knots, and he has a problem. Right? You see? So that's this part of imitation, you take shortcuts. You imitate, pending verification that it was the right thing to do. And then life tells you, oh, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I follow his piece of advice. I'm glad. You see, I'm glad I've benefited from this kind of, and I took the shortcut, and now I understand why it was the impersonal path. You see? It's like another argument is like, let's assume you want to learn how to play the violin. Two options, You ask Isaac Stern to teach you private lessons, or the cheap way, because I guess he was not cheap, the cheap way, you buy on Kindle a book, The Art of Violin Playing. Guess who has the highest likelihood to play one at Carnegie Hall. Yeah. Why? What's the difference? The difference is the imitation, is that he's there and he shows you and he sings with you as you play and your violin imitates, and very different. It's a form of communication that instead of being transmitted through the very narrow bandwidth of words, the entire body, the entire means, all the means of communications are working. All the mirroring neurons, all the senses, everything is part of the experience.
Really quickly, because something just came to mind when you were saying that, is like you're imitating this person, but going back to the betrayal thing, you said you're imitating their body at least, but you say that it's impersonal. Betrayal is a impersonal pain. Is that the right way to deal with people, to interact with people as if there is no person there and there's no person here?
Yeah, absolutely. Try it. Because then there won't be pain in case of betrayal. You'll be ready. You have to be ready. As I told you, trust only awareness. So awareness will never let you down. Everything else will, because everything else is impermanent.
Thank you.
Hi, Francis. Last week, I wanted to contemplate something with you. Last week you had said that the world, there is from the infinite potential, one could say that what we see or inform there is a reduction of the potential. And that seems to make sense to me. And another contemplation around that is a word that comes to mind is expression, or some form of actualization of a potential. And often when I look at things in the world, I wonder, just as a thought, what was God thinking? What is in God's mind that He creates that? And there's no answer to it, but it's just a form of curiosity. So I guess what I wanted to check with you, it's more poetic. I'm not really looking for an answer, but that it seems there is a sacredness to this actualization or expression, in the sense that perhaps it's the other side of the coin. Maybe I said too much. Perhaps I think I don't know what my question is.
I don't know what my answer is.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have a question online? Oh, there is one more question there. The mic has been confiscated.
It's a question from Melissa. Please elaborate more deeply about making, quote, impersonal actions, unquote. I have no further belief in any separate, limited awareness. But
Say that again?
Excuse me. I have no further belief in any separate, limited awareness, but I am still attracted and attached to things in the world. Is that a problem? Happiness is becoming clearer and clearer in my experience.
The only problem is, what are you referring to when you say, I am still attached? Are you referring to awareness, or are you referring to the body and the mind? It's normal for the body and the mind to be attached to whatever is pleasant and comfortable. Awareness is never attached to anything. So all you need is clarity. To understand the desires, the needs of the body and of the mind. As I said earlier, like children, you are the parent. You decide, and they have to deal with your decision.
A question from New.
From?
NU, New. Would you please define grace first, please, as I think this word is another with different understandings. I guess this is from the previous question that you had answered.
It's a word which is used mostly in a religious context. In a religious context, it will be the experience of God. In a philosophical context, it would be the experience of our true nature. They are not the same. They are not the same. Because we cannot experience our true nature without the experience of God. But we can have the revelation of God without the experience, the revelation of our true nature. So, the religious grace creates a mystic, and the philosophical grace creates a sage. All sages are mystics. Not all mystics are sages.
Ainsley asks, could you define intelligence? It is not purely a function of the mind, correct?
It is not a function of the mind. It is falsely attributed to the mind. Ask yourself the question, is there any difference experientially between that which perceives, that which hears, and that which understands? That which perceives, we call it awareness. That which understands, we call it intelligence or understanding. So, in that sense, intelligence is an attribute of reality. I define awareness as a reality that perceives. But the reality that perceives is also the reality that understands, aka intelligence. So intelligence is in fact another name for reality and for awareness.
How is it different from intellect?
Well, the word intellect, the meaning has evolved. Because, of course, etymologically, intellect is that which has intelligence, right? Is that which understands. But it has evolved over the years, and we have the word intellectual, you know, the intelligentsia, the chosen few who are in academia and in certain circles. They are supposed to be the intelligent ones. The French philosopher Montaigne, speaking about education, once said that the purpose of education was not to fill up heads, to build them well. So a well-built head is much better than a well-filled up head. Because if the head is filled up, there is no room for anything else. It becomes a closed head. So intelligence is that part that understands. It is not about the accumulated mass of knowledge, because for that we have Wikipedia. Nowadays, we don't need any longer to put too much stuff in our heads. Clarity is that which comes with simplicity, not with complexity. That's that which I call intelligence. It's a reduction of complexity into simplicity when everything at some point dissolves into self-evidence. We can see that, how it happens when we understand something. It's a thought process that simplifies itself, reduces itself to almost nothing, and then we have this aha moment. It's instantaneous. It's a glimpse of our true nature, which is intelligence itself. I know it's hard to be open to it, because usually we localize intelligence in the head, where we localize awareness. But remember that I define intelligence as the reality that understands, in the same way as I define awareness as the reality that perceives. The reality. So if you agree that there is only one reality, then this reality is intelligence and awareness.
She says, there seems to be multiple forms of intelligence in nature.
I would say that the multiplicity is in that which is which is understood, not in that which understands. There is no differentiation in that which understands experientially. The only differences are in the modalities that differentiate among the various problems or difficulties that found their resolution in understanding. For instance, the case could be made that just as a form of understanding is required to understand a joke, for instance, after the punchline, but another form of understanding is required to understand how another person is feeling in a given context. But we use the same word. Although there is a huge difference in understanding why a person is suffering and understanding a joke. They seem to be completely separate, completely different types of understanding. So the various forms of intelligence depends on the nature of how we go there, on the path that leads to the experience of understanding, but at the summit, there is only one summit in these mountains, in this mountain. Many paths lead to it.
Okay. Mladen asks, regarding different levels of authority, sometimes I'm too ignorant to recognize that my mind, not my true self, has been the authority and driven by personal desires. I seem to recognize this only in hindsight. Although the level of suffering has diminished over time, I feel entrapped by this repetitive pattern, and I wish to break free from it. Any advice?
See that you choose it, at least in hindsight. Because if you fail to accept that you have chosen it, then you have to do the same trip again and again and again, up until you finally accept, I chose it. I am not the victim, or if I am a victim, I am a victim of my choosing. I chose it. Understand your freedom.